So hello and welcome to the final Intra Amsterdam virtual festival session of today. Thank you so much to Gabby and Amber for their brilliant talks earlier. We're super excited for our next talk, which is from a speaker we are welcoming back to Interact, Kate Nightingale. Kate is a consumer psychologist, human brands expert and founder of Style Psychology, a human experience consultancy with a unique formula that mixes decades of scientific wisdom on human behaviour with their team's unrivaled experience in consumer business and creative thinking. In this talk, Kate will explore research from various behavioural sciences and showcase some examples of how we can tickle the whole human brain. As always, please get involved and say hello to each other in the chat. Make sure you switch your chat settings to panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your messages. And yeah, please let us know if there's any issues with the stream. Also, please do ask lots of questions using the Q&A box. I'll be asking these to Kate at the end and I will get through as many as I can. So without further ado, I will hand over to Kate to kick things off.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I didn't realize I'm actually the last session. This is so much fun. So I hope you really enjoyed this whole week. Everything that guys from the Mensa are always doing is so incredible. So hopefully I can kind of put a cherry on a cake with that. So as I was kindly introduced, I am a consumer, but also a fashion psychologist. And within my consultancy, we work with lots of different brands, predominantly retail, some hospitality, and some tech as well, across brand strategy, customer experience, design, and innovation. And we look at every single channel. It doesn't matter what channel, although I do have a generic preference for physical channels. But hey, we'll obviously talk about digital more today. As you can see, I work with a number of different really cool brands. Swarovski, Snack, we're a sofa in a box company. So by the way, if you need a cool sofa for Christmas, this is where you go, because they deliver in 3 days and you can assemble it by yourself. And Dazing & Reynolds, Klarna, and Zoppa recently. I also lecture at a few different universities. And obviously speak at a number of these things. Am I seeing there's like lots of chat messages? Oh, okay, cool. It's just highs and lovely. Great stuff. Okay, so what I really want to talk to you about today is basically kind of what I do, just apply it a little bit more to the online and digital world. So this is a super simplified version of what I do every single day for our clients. So I basically reverse engineer what happens inside of our head to try to get our clients the right perceptions or actions or behaviors or decisions. So, like brands kind of come to you and say, oh, I want people to feel this, and I want them to buy more, and I want them to kind of go to our story more often or whatever else, right? And then you kind of need to figure out how the heck we're actually going to achieve that, right? So the way we then work with designers and with brands and with strategists or anyone else is try to basically figure out what happens in people's minds within a fraction of a second, more often than not, that leads to that desired perceptions, actions, decisions, behaviors, and so on. And then we end up kind of coming with a set of stimuli, or as I like to call it, a matrix of stimuli, which I'm pretty sure you like more as a term, that will eventually lead to those desired actions. So let's kind of run through some of those things that are happening within that process that lead to particular sort of results. So obviously, first, we need to kind of figure out what happens kind of within our brain, right? How it kind of generally works. I'm pretty sure quite a lot of you already know that information, right? So our subconscious brain is way, 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 way more powerful than our conscious one. You're pretty sure you know already that there's no computer as powerful as our brain, especially our subconscious brain. But according to some really clever scientists, our subconscious brain processes 11 million bits of information per second. That's per second, and that's processes, not just perceives. Meaning that that process that I showed you, which in reality is way more complicated than that, happens within a fraction of a second, and you already know what you are doing, or actually you're doing it, but you have absolutely no clue that that just happened, that you just made that decision. Whereas on a conscious level, you are barely able to do 40 bits of information. So that's something like three phone numbers, and that's it. So, and that's in the best case scenario, right? When you're not tired, not drunk, not annoyed, not emotional in some other form, not overwhelmed or whatever else, right? So basically, we can probably be like half it within the last few months, right? So that's kind of roughly our ability of our conscious brain per second. So not really a lot. But considering the fact that our subconsciousness picks up everything that's going on around us and all of the times without really our awareness, and takes all of that information into account in making its decisions, in behaving, in informing, for example, our hands on how to move around or our eyes of where to move, we need to then be aware of what are those 11 million bits of information, or let's say at least some of few thousand of those, that we can put in front of that customer, so their subconsciousness picks up those things and therefore gets them to behave, to feel, to decide certain things, right? Okay, so this is where our senses come in super handily, right? There's no other way to enter our brain than through our senses. Absolutely no other one, right? This is the only way that our brain has a contact with an external, but also with an internal world within our body as well. Now, according to, depending on which scientist, we have between 3 to 33 senses. So not just 5. There is obviously those kind of 5 major ones that are kind of bigger groups of senses, which still contain a lot more within them. So whenever we work with our clients, we consider usually about 8 or 9 bigger of those groups. So those 6 that you're seeing over here, as well as balance, movement, and something called embodied cognition. So bodily sensations are actually quite simple. So in here, it's about kind of our receptors within our muscles, because our muscles have a tendency to automatically react to things that they perceive in an environment. So they tense or relax in response to something that's in an environment. They usually tense in response to something that could be a potential danger, and relax in response to something that's safe for us. So that also is then being taken into account by our brain to understand what is happening in a current second in our environment, and how should I therefore react to what is happening around me. So the very typical research around bodily sensations is looking at softness and hardness of surfaces that are available to our vision or to our muscles and our experience. So you don't actually have to, for example, stand on a soft floor or a hard floor, or sit on a soft sofa or a hard sofa, to be able to have that kind of sensation in your muscles, and therefore for your brain to pick it up. It's enough that you see it or that you imagine it. Therefore, for example, introducing imagery or wording that's related to softness or hardness will activate those parts of the muscles, and therefore will allow the brain to pick up that information. For example, in terms of the perception of softness, that affects, for example, how we perceive the brands, and therefore we see the brands as more friendly and approachable, whereas hardness, for example, affects us to perceive brands as more reliable and trustworthy. So even things like certain wordings or imagery that might kind of have, or or let's say if you have a very kind of unique visual sort of design elements of a particular logo, or a certain kind of, finishes, for example, of particular colors that make it look a little bit more velvety, for example, or make it look more like concrete, then that also will be picked up with softness or hardness. So through visual elements, we are still going to activate a lot of other senses. Now, I'm going to play that quickly for you. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you kind of got a little bit dizzy or maybe even a little bit physically sick. And that's not a surprise. This is where we sort of talk about a sense of balance, right? So the challenge with our sense of balance is any kind of moving imagery like that, or super flashing imagery, or a lot of kind of wavy patterns, for example, have a tendency to affect our sense of balance and therefore make us feel uncertain. And more often than not, also a little bit sick. Now, even slight impact on our balance creates that sense of uncertainty and lack of safety also, therefore. So we are therefore much more likely to leave that experience or feel unsatisfied with it, or be less likely to purchase something, or even if we do purchase something, we feel less certain about that purchase and therefore less satisfied. And more often than not, we also going to sort of feel kind of like we need to sort of exert more control over that environment to kind of create a metaphorical sense of balance for ourselves. There we go. Okay, so another thing that we need to think about is movement, right? So again, look at the video over here. So notice how all of the clothing is presented in an actual movement, right? You can clearly then sense the energy, the vibrancy, the sort of the freedom that it kind of gives you, right? Also notice that it's moving from left to right. Sorry, so you're seeing me the other way around, so it will be left to right. Now, in all of the countries that naturally write from left to right, that kind of would be the forward movement. Actually, forward movement is associated with brands that are more innovative, more modern, whereas backward movement will be better. So coming from the right to left will be better for brands that are more classic or heritage, right? So kind of also the aspect of kind of creating that so-called dynamic imagery. So not necessarily that it's a video, but the fact that the image looks as if it's moving, right? So it's not kind of, in a state of just normal plain clothing, for example, or anything else, but it kind of has that movement to itself. That has been associated in a number of research with higher engagement, higher attention to that particular product and generally to their website, as well as enhanced purchase intentions. So as you can see, even just kind of creating a slightly different, imagery or sort of in creating some level of, of animation or video or anything like that, is naturally going to enhance that movement. But please remember, in terms of the direction of movement, also think about the movements of the hands where that people are actually having to do, whether that's on a touch screen or whether that's kind of moving the cursor on the mouse, because any kind of movement upward is enhancing the perception of value. Any movement downward is decreasing the perception of value, but also the price. So think about kind of how you're asking people to interact with the interface. Now, in terms of actual sort of tactile interaction, that's a little bit more difficult. However, just a simple consideration of, are they using a touch device, such as obviously mobile or or tablet, or are they using a mouse kind of cursor activated device? So a number of research has shown that obviously the touch devices seem to be kind of creating higher engagement and generally higher purchase intention, but they get people to focus more on hedonic rather than utilitarian or functional options and features. So for example, when in one study, when they looked at hotel rooms, people that looked at them on touch devices were considering more of the sort of tangible attributes, such as, for example, decor, as well as kind of taking more of their own gut feeling into the account and making a decision, rather than looking at more sort of intangible attributes such as, service or Wi-Fi or whatever else, which usually theoretically are some of the most important ones, or even rather than taking into account reviews, which also are not that drastically tangible. Now, the challenge with touch online is obviously, that's the reason why we mostly go into the stores. We want to touch things because we don't feel like we can actually touch anything. Now, generally, the ability to touch a product, allowing us a certain sense of ownership over that product, because we start to emotionally engage with that product. We almost like mark it with our touch, right? And because of that, we're also going to value that product higher and be much more likely to buy it. I don't know if Apple still does that. I'm not a Apple customer. I know it's wrong thing, but I personally don't like the brand, but I appreciate its strategy. But they used to do that in their stores, where all of their MacBooks were kind of opened about 30% only. So when you wanted to actually engage with the product and sort of play with it, you had to go and open it up, forcing you therefore to touch it, right? Now, it's a little bit more challenging to do that online, but we can achieve some of those things by creating, obviously, really good Zoom aspects, as well as utilizing wording, for example. So any kind of words describing the product that contain a lot of sort of tactile metaphors are going to be very useful. Also asking a customer to imagine that they touching a product through, for example, painting a story, or through a video, or a messaging that it's included in a product description or an advert or anything else, is actually working considerably in a similar intensity and manner as physically touching it. And it's not just about the touch. It is about every other sensory modality. Imagination and or memory of sensory sensations is activating our brain in pretty much the same intensity and in exactly the same parts as actually physically experiencing that sensory sensation. That specific study also looked, and some other researchers following that if we kind of get people to imagine that they're touching a product, that sense of ownership is actually also increasing. The engagement with the product is increasing, and the perception of the value of the product is also increasing. So that aspect of interacting, of getting them to imagine is also key. Now, there are obviously developments in terms of something along the lines of a digital touch. Now, they are still in its infancy. There's a number of kind of examples of it. This is one of them from a company called Canvas, which actually created special devices that utilize kind of sort of frequencies that that interact with your receptors within your within your fingers, and they sort of activate them in a way as if you actually sensing particular textures. Now, it is not still very sort of good in terms of the full-blown application and reliability of it across different scenarios. The biggest challenge of it is obviously the standard devices that we are using, which obviously have to be the touch devices, do not have that kind of technology built into their screens yet, nor it's really kind of affordable enough to be implemented. There are, however, obviously a lot of other kind of research around it. Probably one of the best researchers and the lab is by Alison Okamura from Stanford University and their Charm Lab. They are actually doing crazy amounts of really cool research around haptics, specifically kind of, you know, obviously digital online haptics solutions, or replacing kind of, you know, various interfaces with other kind of interfaces that are moldable in terms of, and flexible in terms of the haptic input that they give you. So they utilize a lot of that aspects across things like medicine, education, but obviously across other implementations as well. So the second link that you're seeing on this slide, I'll obviously share the slides with Nomensa later on, is showcasing a couple of videos around that research of that lab. Now, please remember that that aspect of kind of creating that illusion and imagination of touch is unfortunately anything that we can at the moment do. But, you know, but it is, however, enough if we kind of grasp that imagination of that customer when they are interacting with our device, with our interfaces. Now, another challenging thing is something called mental manipulation. So for us to truly engage with a product, we generally have a tendency to imagine how we are using that product. Part of what is really important in that mental manipulation is something called embodied cognition. So embodied cognition basically refers to us associating and remembering certain things related to particular body positions and movements. So the best example of it is something called Superman pose. So you kind of put your hands on your hips, your head up high, and you kind of stand like that for a few minutes to feel stronger, more confident, right? So the good thing about it is that the more we kind of understand what are certain kind of associations and what are certain actions that are related to particular body movements, we are able to then basically reverse engineer that and utilize that in our design, right? So this is one of the really nice studies from a researcher called Aradhana Krishna. She does a lot of really cool research around sensory marketing and advertising. So worth looking at a number of those things that she does, because obviously utilizing some of that research and translating them into more, more of the kind of online and digital user interface would be something that definitely will help in terms of the interaction. And I use a lot of her research and similar researchers in anything that we do for our clients. So when the unfortunate UX or web designers or branding designers deal with us, they get this kind of big list of things. No, we want it like that. We want it kind of rounded. We want it sort of moving that way. Can we have the interaction that way? Can we have the button placed over here? Can you move the color by 2, shades and whatever else? And it's like, oh my goodness. They don't like us by the end of the process, but the final effect is much better. Anyway, so this is a lovely research showcasing how important is congruency or consistency of the dominant hand to how we asking a person to interact with a particular image or user interface. So in this kind of study, they looked at a number of different products and how they kind of almost like removed different steps that our brain would have to do to imagine how you're using a product. So for example, in a case of a yogurt, if I'm going to give you a packaging of a yogurt, I have to imagine how I put it in a bowl and maybe how I put some fruits over it and how I use a spoon and whatever else. And I'm like, They obviously removed a lot of those steps for me, but more importantly, they placed the utensil on a particular side So if my dominant hand is a right hand, it's easier for me to interact with the image on the bottom right hand side of the slide, whereas if my dominant hand is a left hand, it will be easier to interact with the one on the left hand side. Now, this is a super lovely example of that. I'll play you that video. Assuming it decides to work. Okay, cool. So notice how this kind of design allows me to have almost a version of a tactile control over the product and how I'm kind of, you know, interacting with it. It kind of starts to feel almost normal. But notice that the tactile control happens on the right-hand side, so rather than on the left-hand side. So it will be much easier for someone that's right-handed to engage with that type of, you know, user interface than someone that's left-handed. Now, the challenge with that is we can't yet personalize the design of the websites to, you know, to such an information, because obviously that's not kind of gathered well enough by the data. Although you never know, there is no limitations on that. We could eventually grasp it from the way someone is using their screen to, or how someone is using their mouse pad or even their keyboard. So, you know, we can gather some of that information, maybe eventually kind of personalize the website in that form to overall enhance that mental manipulation of the product and therefore engagement with it and a likelihood of purchase, right? So now the next kind of challenge is our sense of smell. This is probably something that kind of gets people like, I can probably understand all the previous ones, but this one, I'm like, how do I do smell? Now, again, imagination, memory. So this is yet another study from the team behind sort of Aradhana Krishna's research. They basically gave people a picture of chocolate cookies and asked them to rate it as a product. And kind of rate that at. And then there was another group that they gave a picture of those cookies, but also asked them to imagine how the cookie smelled. Needless to say, the people that were asked to imagine how the cookie smelled were way more engaged, were more likely to buy that cookie. And when they finally got those cookies, they ate, as you can see, 48% more of those cookies. So the level of engagement just by its imagination of another sensory sensation associated with it was basically enhanced. It's the sort of almost idea of managing sensory expectations, right? And because it's your own imagination, you are painting a picture. Now, if we obviously are going to sort of describe a particular sensory sensation, such as smell, and utilize a lot of words or include various kind of, you know, symbols of particular information of particular smell, then it's going to kind of be more uniform across our customers. So a lovely example of it is some imagery from one of my clients. Their website is super basic. They've just literally launched, so it's actually being sold. So it's nowhere to the level that we want it to be, but their imagery is really lovely because it really sort of tells the story of the product, of its ingredients, but also allows you to much more readily imagine or remember certain smells and taste of the product. So it's easier for you to kind of engage in it, but also enhance the value perception of that product. So you will be much more likely to pay a right price for that product. Notice also how easily, especially on the image on the left-hand side of the soap, is activating also some of the tactile sensations, not to mention also has symbols of particular places, such as, for example, sea, right? Because with the seashells and stuff like that. So all of that kind of information is really simple to kind of put in a creative direction or to include in a names or descriptions of products or in slogans on adverts or anything like that. as well as obviously included in other aspects of sensory design, such as the right coloring, the right framing, different shapes of the of the design, certain type of sort of interaction that we're going to have in terms of how you scroll or you don't scroll, whatever else, that will further kind of intensify those sensory experiences. Now, taste. Again, another, oh my goodness, what should I do with it? It's not possible online. And okay, there is research already starting to happen in terms of digital taste, or kind of, user interfaces that activate particular taste sensations. However, it's still very kind of, far, far away. And please remember that when we look at flavor in general, so not just taste, because flavor, an experience of it, is based on taste, smell. It's also based on texture, temperature, and pressure that we have in our mouth when we are eating something, right? So any of those things get removed, such as, I'm pretty sure one of you was at a dentist and got, the injection with, no, what it's called, when it kind of numbs part of your mouth. And I don't know how about you, but occasionally when I had that, I had some food and drink and whatever else, and how different it tastes. I super remember having this amazing iced coffee with, like, vanilla ice cream inside and whatever else, kind of all blended gorgeously. And it tasted so differently on one side of my mouth where it was still numb, and completely differently on the other side, because of that kind of intersection between all of those different aspects, all of those different senses that need to come together, all of those different receptors that need to be activated in just the right way for me to experience that specific flavor that I remember. But if any of those receptors is not active for whatever reason, not really experiencing that, right? So that obviously that digital taste is starting to work with that, but it obviously needs to work also with digital smell, which is being slowly developed, but again, very kind of, infant steps. But we can, however, again, activate by imagination or by metaphors, right? So notice how we use sensory metaphors in everyday language. Someone has a warm personality. It was a smooth sailing. Someone has it rough, meaning difficult circumstances. All of those metaphors and way more can be naturally utilized, and they will, whether we realize it or not, whether we want it or not, they will also activate the sensory parts of our brain, right? Those that kind of process those particular sensory sensations. These are a couple of lovely arts showcasing how you can kind of connect, for example, sound with taste, right? Or how you can connect touch, so the sharpness, with taste. And it already kind of starts telling you about, for example, the sharpness is about this kind of, this almost like pressure, and that, that spikes that you feel when you eat any kind of citrus, right? And without that, that sensation isn't good enough, right? So we can start sort of slowly activating some of those things. Now, another super important element, obviously, in all of that is how do we activate our emotions, or generally, actually, all of our affective states. So emotions are just one of our affective states, not all of them. There's a number of different ways of dividing affective states, but I just want to kind of put your attention to two of them. So we have this kind of way of dividing it in terms of whether we are actually reacting to a particular object or situation or person or anything like that, which is more of an evaluative feeling or affective state in general, or whether it's something that hasn't been caused by anything, isn't a specific reaction to something, but it's more kind of an existing internal state. And that's where usually moods come in, We don't necessarily have a specific trigger for our moods or for our general feelings, but but they kind of exist, and they're usually much longer term as well. Whereas evaluative feelings, so quite often emotions, for example, or just a general kind of evaluations are going to be specifically triggered by something or someone, but at the same time will be almost like a judgment of that thing or that person or that situation or that design, right, that you have created. Now, our emotions are generally affective states, but emotions even more so because they're way more intensive than, for example, basic evaluations or our moods. But they're super short-lived as well. But it's even better because therefore, we don't really have an awareness of them happening. What we do have an awareness of is our thinking about what emotion we have just experienced. And quite often we are quite wrong about what emotion we have just experienced, because it could have been excitement, but but we decided that it's fear, right? So our attribution of our emotional experiences quite often is wrong compared to what we have actually experienced, because what we think we are feeling is partially a cognitive, so thought-based process, whereas what is actually happening in our body in terms of our reaction, that is purely emotional, that is purely kind of arousal based. But nevertheless, we still kind of need to understand its positive impact. So one of those things is obviously we're going to have a selective attention, right? So we're only going to notice things that are consistent, congruent with how we are feeling. So if I'm feeling happy, I'm only going to focus on things that make me even more happy, right? Any of you ever listen to sad songs all the time when you broke up with someone? That's kind of how it works, right? So generally, our brain has a tendency to confirm its already existing viewpoint of the world and stuff like that. It really hates conflict. So it will naturally only focus our attention on things that are consistent and congruent to how we feel. Now, the good thing about positive emotions is that we're generally going to value product higher when we're experiencing them, but only products that are not familiar to us, that are not typical things that we already buy or that we have already been exposed to previously, right? So if you have done, for example, an extensive research on your new gadget, just because you are having a super happy feeling, it's not necessarily going to make your valuations of the product much different, or just because you are super sad at that day or really annoyed with someone, it's not really going to change your valuation of the product drastically. However, if it's kind of less familiar, more kind of impulse-based purchase, if it's kind of newish brand or product that you haven't experienced yet, your evaluations can be considerably affected by how you are feeling at that moment. And obviously we can evoke a lot of those emotions and affective states the way we want. Now, the more intensive the affective states, so specifically emotions, because they're the most intensive ones, the more memorable that particular experience is, right? But also the easier it is to then recall those kind of memories, especially when we are experiencing a similar emotion that we had when we encoded that memory, right? Now, but last but not least, associating particular affective states, particular emotions with certain things. I was just checking the chat just to make sure that I'm not out of time, but I think I'm not. So associating particular emotions or generally affective states with brands is what more often than not going to get people to reciprocate to a brand by positive word of mouth, by buying, by recommendations or whatever else. But it's also what eventually going to be the thing that people return to the brand for, right? So if you are continuously exposing a customer to a particular sort of emotion, or generally something that's supposed to evoke a particular emotional state, and a brand next to it, we are naturally getting conditioned to associate those things together, right? So whenever then I want to, let's say, feel relaxed, and this is what you asked me to associate in through repeated exposure with that brand, then every single time I want to feel relaxed, I will then automatically go back to your brand. So that's also where it's really important. So needless to say, what I then need to do is continuously associate emotions with a particular brand. Now, one of the simplest, I mean, totally simplest ways of creating, of evoking particular emotions is by emotional contagion, right? I know, probably not the best words to use when we have a global pandemic, but emotions are contagious. So maybe let's focus on, on emotions being like a virus, not any other virus, right? So this is again a lovely example from one of my clients, Snack. They, since the beginning, I told them, and they always made sure that in a lot of their imagery, they have very natural, very authentic emotional experiences being presented. Whenever they obviously have people in there. And the thing about that is that whenever we are exposed to someone's emotions, such as, for example, me smiling right now, your brain cannot help but naturally mimic those emotions, even in a slightest manner, because we're obviously social animals, and if we're not going to do what people around us do, then we have a potential danger, right? So we are naturally going to do that. Now, obviously, we can't always, showcase people and their authentic emotions, but we can, however, include lots of other sensory sensations that are associated throughout our, education in this world, throughout conditioning with particular emotions, such as things like colors or shapes or certain movements or, sensations of other kinds like tactile. All of those things will then naturally start activating very subtly, but sometimes enough, those various kind of emotional experiences. So that's why it's even more important to initially establish also what are those various affective states that we want people to experience. What do we want them to feel? And how do we believe those affective states lead to our desired perceptions, but also behaviors and decisions, right? So we also need to understand that link between experiencing particular emotional state and what does it mean for our behaviors or decisions or a perception of a brand, right? So when we kind of start grasping that and combining a lot of those sensory sensation or something as bluntly simple as expressing emotions in our imagery, then we actually starting to more consistently evoke those specific emotions. Now, be super careful. It's not as simple as just bluntly dropping the same emotions everywhere at every part of the customer journey. No, because intensity of those emotional states, as well as okay, I see questions. Great stuff. Almost done over here, and then we can go to questions. So it's not as simple as just bluntly dropping the same emotions and the same intensity and trying to evoke them. No, because it's also a journey. So especially if we, for example, want a person to kind of, associate things like relaxation or empowerment, which are really super big, emotional experiences with our brand, that needs to come from this kind of beautiful wave of different intensity of different emotional experiences throughout the customer journey. So I also like to always focus on things I like to basically create sort of this crescendo and diminuendo throughout the customer journey. So crescendo is kind of bringing up the volume up, for those that don't know musical terms, and diminuendo is dropping the volume down. Because at the end of the day, at the end of that kind of customer journey experience, you need to have a sense of culmination. And if you don't have that sense of culmination, you're feeling like something is missing, like you haven't finished, like there is not fully satisfied moment that, that happened over there. And if you don't have that overall satisfaction, but also that kind of memory of that experience cannot be kind of completed, and that, and it's kind of always something is missing, leading therefore to lower satisfaction. So there needs to also be this super kind of, either very subtle or very strong culminating point, depending on the brand. But more importantly, I'm pretty sure most of you know the concept of flow. So this idea of really kind of getting lost in a moment, of forgetting about anything else. Don't eat, don't sleep, don't go to the toilet, so engrossed in something that you just forget that the world exists. That's the ideal flow, right? So according to kind of lots of research around that, it's generally, to be simplified, it's a combination of enjoyment and concentration, right? But probably the best way to experience flow is obviously in nature. So for example, let's say you're hiking a particular trail, or you're climbing up a mountain, or whatever else. That's usually where it's easiest for us to actually experience the best kind of level of sense of flow. But obviously, whenever you are super, passionate about something and really kind of focused on creating something, that's when also you can kind of experience that moment. Now, there is loads of different tactics, some of those that I've obviously described to you, but plenty more around creating that flow online, and a lot of kind of really cool research, and that specific review of research that summarized it, showcased how how many amazing benefits there are from creating that sense of flow online. So needless to say, you can read that for yourself, but think generally how you can start kind of utilizing a lot of those senses and emotions to kind of lead to that overall sense of flow. So that kind of, full immersion, full engrossment into that moment, really kind of getting those people lost in that moment, so they are able to eventually kind of experience a lot of those kind of benefits from their interaction. So that would be it from me. So now I'm gonna stop sharing and we can go into loads of questions. Go on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kate. That was awesome. Yeah, there's so many takeaways there. It'd be great to share slides after this, which everyone would love, a recap on all that research you explored. I know I'll definitely be noticing lots of food adverts with spoons placed strategically on the right-hand side now. If anyone has any questions, please let us know in the Q&A box. I know, while we're waiting for that, I know we have one here from Simon.
Obviously.
Simon asks, responding to your point about designers being told what to design, so my question is, what's your approach to collaboration?
Good one, Simon. I think you should know the answer to that. Hello. So yeah, absolutely. Collaboration always. I'm rubbish at design. I can tell you, I draw like a 2-year-old kid. But obviously a lot of the stuff that I've learned from all these amazing scientists is unfortunately a lot of the times the stuff that designers are not being taught at school. I'm trying to fix it. I'm teaching at a number of different places, but and there's more and more kind of really amazing courses which include a lot of that. But nevertheless, no one knows everything. And that's why that kind of multidisciplinary approach, like you, Simon, made sure you have in the Mensa, is something that's absolutely necessary to creation of an absolutely incredible experiences, but more importantly, a better world, right? Because if we don't understand everything that is possible in terms of a design or in terms of technology, but yet at the same time, we don't understand everything that's amazing in terms of human beings and how we behave and how we want to live our lives, and we then don't kind of mush it all together like a lovely, good recipe for a cake, then we're not going to bake a better world, right? So it's kind of, that's general principle. You've noticed my metaphor over here. So can you smell this gorgeous gingerbread for Christmas at the moment? You know, that could be a better world, right? So yeah, so next time you want to kind of create a better experience, just kind of think about building a gingerbread house instead of designing a user interface.
Awesome, thanks, Kay. We don't have any more questions in the meantime, but I have a question for you. I noticed we had a few students sign up for this session. So it'd be great to kind of learn about, you know, if you could say a bit about your path into kind of consumer and fashion psychology, and kind of what advice you'd give to anyone kind of watching who may want to pursue a career in these fields.
Wow, my path. You certainly don't want that hard version, because whenever the first time I kind of started using, you know, title of fashion psychologist and then consumer psychologist, people thought I was like, and it's not very useful. Yeah, but at the moment it's one of the coolest jobs you can actually do. But yeah, so I knew that there was something in it, you know, so I persevered. But at the moment it's so much easier. In terms of that, to be honest, if you want to study psychology, or if you want to study any kind of, you know, design or marketing or anything like that, a lot of those courses have already things, you know, around psychology or around other behavioral sciences embedded into it. And more agencies, but also directly brands, hire various behavioral scientists into their different teams across everything, from strategy to insight to design to marketing to even product and, you know, operations and everything else. Basically, let's just call kind of behavioral sciences, you know, like kind of invasion of sorts. You know, we can be everywhere by now. So, and fingers crossed, there will be way more of us, so we can actually create a better world out there.
Awesome, thank you. And I think that kind of answers
we have some questions in the Q&A section.
Question. Any tips someone who's willing to change career path from user interface design to behavioural and cognitive psychology? Will a master's help? And how to present herself to industry after finishing a course, for example? Hope that's clear enough. And that's for
yeah, good one. Yeah, definitely a master's will help. There's plenty of masters out there. I personally teach at masters in marketing psychology at Regent's University. And it's actually really kind of, you know, interesting combination of entrepreneurship, partially also organizational psychology, and more of sort of consumer media psychology that I teach. And I also last year started supervising some of the dissertations over there, including hiring one of the students that I supervised their dissertation. So there are obviously way more of those sort of masters available out there, and they're becoming better and better. But you need to be really careful that you choose the masters that has lecturers that are from industry, and that they actually focusing on application, because still a lot of universities is very kind of academic focused. And I'm very kind of fortunate to be asked to lecture at those universities that really wants to kind of that industry viewpoint, and really kind of understand how they can apply those things, rather than just, you know, just learn theories, because you can read a book, to be honest, right? So yeah, so that makes much more sense. Second question we have here is, what imagery is known to give the strongest emotional responses? Okay, so this is where my absolutely favorite answer to every question fits in very nicely. It depends. Literally, it depends. Now, the reason why I'm saying it is human behavior is not black and white. You can't give a pill and it's gonna work. No, it doesn't work. You can't press a button on someone's head and this is what's activated. It doesn't work like that. It depends on a brand. It depends on a customer profile. And when I mean customer profile, I mean an absolutely extensive psychographics, not just a couple of points from demographics. It depends on the circumstances, it depends on the channel, on a specific user interface, and so on and so on. So it depends on a current also cognitive and emotional state that someone has, such as, you know, what mood they are in, are they drunk, are they tired, are they sick, are they stressed, and so on and so on. So obviously a number of those things you are not able to consider in your design, but a lot of those things you are able to first establish as a basic foundation, and only then you can figure out which is the image that will work actually, and that is likely to evoke a particular emotional response. And it's not going to be super perfect, you know, 99% accuracy. No, if you're gonna get 70% accuracy, well, my goodness, you just kind of won the lottery. It's literally, you know, but the more accuracy we can get based on a lot of those kind of questions we ask first, the better, obviously, and the more consistent that experience is going to be across the whole brand and their different customer profiles. I hope that kind of answers things rather than confuses them even more.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. I think that's it for the questions. So yeah, thank you so much for such an awesome presentation. Always a pleasure to have you involved in Interact. And yeah, hopefully we can see you at an in real life event next year.
I want a normal conference.
Awesome. We'll be back tomorrow with for our final day of Interact Amsterdam. We have 3 sessions tomorrow from Lauren Ellis, from Informat and ABN AMRO, and also a panel on leadership in design. There's still tickets left. Head over to Eventbrite to grab them. Thank you again, Kate. That was brilliant. And yeah, see everyone tomorrow.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone, and keep safe and happy. And go and bake a cake.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Kate.
Take care. Bye.